Yeah, I'm Colin Baum, Senior Engineer at Novacoast for internal IT. And so we implemented the solution for ourselves, so that's kind of the nature of the title of the presentation. So without any further ado.
Yeah, so I get to work on the customer side and implement these types of solutions for customers. Colin has to make it work for us. So we get to give you a couple of different perspectives as well as from the partner side. So this is the story of Novacoast's journey. This is awfully loud.
Yeah, it seems like you want to try this or.
All right, so going briefly through the agenda. So we'll talk a little bit about where storage is today, talk a little bit more about what it's look like in the future, which direction does storage seem to be heading in, because it's going through a lot of change right now, and the use cases are changing pretty dramatically. You used to just have a single purpose, I need really fast storage for my database, or and then it's grown from there, and it'll continue to grow and change in the future. And then we'll talk about our own use case, because obviously if we're going to be talking about how we're using it, you should understand why we're using it, why we did things the way we did, where we were coming from, and where we were trying to go with it. We'll talk about why we chose Ceph. So Ceph for us was a really good fit. We're going to go through the reasons why, though, because it might not apply to everyone. Obviously everyone's going to be different, but for us it was great. Talk about what went right. Obviously we're still using it, and we're happy with it, and we're expanding on it, so that's a good sign. But along the way, some things went wrong, and we're going to talk about those too. And hopefully you can learn from that, because it's painful to repeat mistakes. Better to learn from someone else's. And then talking about what we're doing next, both internally at Novacoast, because obviously we're still using storage. It's very important to us. Everyone has data, and data matters. And then we'll also talk about what comes next for our customers, because we have a lot of customers using SUSE Enterprise Storage. We'll talk about some of their use cases. Some of them might fit with what you're doing. Is anyone using SUSE Enterprise Storage today? Okay, let's get a few people. Anyone evaluating it or planning to, or are you just trying to learn more at this point? Okay, excellent. So yeah, maybe for those of you who are a little bit more new to it, hopefully some of this is helpful. So what does storage look like today? Well, hopefully none of you have storage like that. If you do, we need to talk a lot more than just this presentation. But traditional storage is very expensive. And it's not just the upfront costs, it's all the hidden costs that go with it. Because, for example, one of the things I deal with all the time when I'm working with customers to work with these types of solutions is, as soon as other vendors hear that we're coming in with this type of solution, they'll often drop the price dramatically. And at renewal time, though, once they're locked back in, it goes back up. So there's all the hidden costs associated with some of the traditional vendors. They really want to lock you into those solutions, and it's painful. So there's been some of those storage makers that have been around forever, and once they get embedded, they want to stay there. And that's a problem when some of them go out of business, or their model lines get discontinued, or you can get stranded. So it's a problem. You get these proprietary solutions, and proprietary solutions can be fine if they're well supported, if they've got a solid company behind them and everything else. But they don't really play nicely with everything else. And they really do oftentimes leverage that to lock you into their solution. It goes back to the vendor lock-in. So storage can be very painful for that. Anyone had their SAN discontinued, or gone through some of the pain of having vendors go out of business, or through acquisitions have product lines discontinued? I know we went through that, which is one of the big reasons we looked at this. It's traditionally been performance-oriented, although that's obviously changing. The landscape for where that storage growth is, everyone needs high-performance storage for some use cases, but the use case around lesser performance storage has really grown. Software-defined, you hear a lot about software-defined. We have software-defined everything these days. So this is a buzzword that's really getting overused, because vendors are using software-defined not to actually talk about something that's software-defined, just to use it as a buzzword. So from a traditional storage manufacturer, and I want to stay current, I can just slap this name on, and all of a sudden I'm software. Well, no, software-defined means you've got software and you've got hardware, and the two aren't the same. So when you're bundling them together and they're completely locked in, I don't really define that as software-defined, but some people do. So where is storage going? This is important to figure out as well, because I can't plan for something just today. This is a huge investment when you're looking at things like storage, and not just because of the cost, but because it's going to lock you into a certain direction of how you're using that storage. So data growth is enormous. Anyone here have less data this year than they did last year? Hopefully not, because that means you probably got horribly hacked or something else. But data is growing. And more importantly, the value of data is growing. Because all this data we used to collect and not do anything with, there's so much you can do now with machine learning and all these AI type algorithms and things like that, where you can generate a lot of real value from this data that historically, yeah, we collect logs, but we don't do much with it. Now we can take those logs and do a lot of security analytics and figure out, oh my gosh, bad things are happening. Or we can take all this customer data that we've been logging forever, and all of a sudden now we can glean new insights into what our customers are doing, what they really want, what they don't want, how we can serve them better. This whole customer obsessed mentality. You can do that with all this data, but you need to be able to store that data somewhere and be able to do something with it. So that's growing, and that's part of all these cool new use cases people are coming up with. When storage is expensive, people don't think about ways of using it as much, but when it gets cheaper, when it becomes more open and scalable and flexible, all of a sudden the lights can kind of go off and okay, my processing power is cheaper. I can do some really cool stuff with this data now, that I can store it everywhere, that I can make it distributed globally, that I can scale it out however I want. So we'll talk some about those use cases in the end, but there's a lot of new things you can do with data besides just a high performance database or storing your VMs or things like that. There's so much more you can do, and we've got a plan for that. Being distributed, it's not just some standalone SAN sitting in a closet somewhere. You need your data replicated. You need it available everywhere. You need all these different use cases, and sometimes you don't. But a lot of these use cases demand that. And so you've got to have a solution that will work that way, that will be able to scale as your organization scales, not just from a single point, but nationally, internationally, all those types of things. Flexible access protocols is really important. It used to be just one way of attaching to storage, or maybe that would support 2 or 3 ways. It's not that world anymore. We've got so many different ways of accessing that data. I've got application X, which might only support iSCSI, or another one might just need a file system, or another one needs just block storage, or there's all these different ways of different applications to access things. If you're in the DevOps world, or you've got all these kids coming out of college, I need S3 access, or I need Swift, or all these other ways of accessing data, because I don't want to have a different storage solution for each way I access it. That's really painful. You're going to spend a ton of money. You're going to have to support multiple products. I want something that can be accessed through any of these storage protocols, so that I don't have to get all those different solutions. So being flexible and adding support for new methods of accessing storage as they come, really important. Data security. Across the board, this is a huge issue. You've seen what happens when these breaches happen and sensitive data gets out there. You've seen what happens when organizations get hacked and get practically burnt to the ground from an IT perspective. It's really important to secure your data. This isn't an easy to solve problem. It's not something that's even necessarily at the storage layer, but it's something you have to consider when you're rolling out these types of solutions, because looking at storage, we got to keep that secure. And open source integration. This is really important because there's such a huge amount of growth. It really is an engine of innovation when you can work and integrate with other open source solutions. And yes, there's a lot of cases where storage vendors are publishing APIs and they're getting on board with a lot of this stuff. But an API can be great. Sometimes that can solve all your use cases, and all you need is an API. But sometimes you really want to be able to dig at a lower level. And it's not just you, because most organizations are not going to be coding their own storage interface. But when a solution's all open source, that means all the other vendors can integrate with it at a lower level for you. So I don't need to have an integration between my virtualization hypervisor and my storage solution. I don't want to write that myself. I want the vendors to be able to do that. And they can do that at a much better level if something's open source than if it's just a published API. They also have more control, obviously, if it's open source. So there's a lot of advantages to having solutions based on open source. Even if you're never touching the source code, all the other vendors you work with might be, and they're going to integrate at a much better level. Hybrid replication, we've talked a lot about this through the keynotes. You've seen how important that is for everything to play nicely with each other, whether it's working with the cloud, whether it's working locally, whatever it is, you want to be able to support all those different types of hybrid access. So talk a little bit about Novacoast use case. Do you want to?
Yeah, a little bit.
As always, when I come to the hard stuff, I toss up a call and say, hey, make it work.
Yeah, so let's see if I can turn this down. I don't know if there's a volume. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so when I came on board with Novacoast, this was kind of our situation. So we had 3 different legacy SANs. They just kind of built up over time. So we had data that, some of the data we needed on these SANs, some of the data we didn't, but of course, when you have 3 different products, you have that whole thing where you have to support those 3 different products. And then when maintenance contracts come up, that sort of thing, what you tend to do is keep that data that you don't really need on the product that seems to be reaching end of life, and so you don't have to, keep upgrading those maintenance contracts because that gets really expensive. All right, so we have 2 data centers for us. We're headquartered mainly on the West Coast, although we have presence all over the world, but we've got a data center on the West Coast and a data center on the East Coast. So what we really wanted to do was, on our primary data center on the West Coast, we were using that day in and day out for everything. And then our East Coast data center, we looked at for mainly redundancy, but we also wanted to create new applications and test new applications there that if they did go down, we didn't have to really worry about it. So we didn't need that kind of redundancy. So those were kind of our two cases that we wanted to use for our East Coast data center. We have fully Dockerized virtual workloads, depending on what kind of application we were using. And we run all sorts of things at Novacoast. I'm internal IT, so I'm responsible for the thing that touches pretty much everybody's email. So in-house we run Exchange, but we're also running all sorts of SUSE products all over the place, and Docker as well. And pretty much everything is virtualized, although we do have some physical machines that are running applications directly off them. Push for innovation. So outside of internal IT, my department's responsibilities are really, as I said before, with the East Coast data center, we're testing applications all the time. And we test these applications so that then we can decide whether or not we want to recommend them to our customers. We work with various partners, and that's probably one of the most fun things that we get to do, is test these new applications. And not all of them are ready for prime time, obviously, but at least from our perspective as a company, the way we add value is to make sure that we vet these different applications before we're going to recommend them. The last thing we want to do is recommend an application to a customer and then have them come back to us and say, yeah, it's not really doing what you said, which is worse, and we can't take it and expand it and make it do what we want to do. So we try to vet that as thoroughly as possible.
And I would just like to add, Novacoast is lucky enough to have a very technical CTO. So he's very interested in innovation. He knows technology really, really well, and is interested in pushing the limits so that, his guys, his core, is basically speaking the same kind of language that he's talking. Highly technical.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably one of what the storage solution allows us to do is take these products, and if they fail, it's not a big deal for us. So because we're pushing the limits of innovation, failure is obviously something that is just par for the course. So, nobody likes to fail, but if you're not failing, it means you're probably not innovating to a certain extent. So we really needed, as I kind of led up to, a flexible, scalable solution for this, and we're going to talk about why we chose software-defined storage with SUSE.
So one other thing to note about Novacoast briefly is we focus on really difficult, challenging solutions. So we don't want to be doing, we will, but we don't want to be doing really basic stuff. We go for the really hard stuff. And as a result, we want to be able to do that internally first, because we're not going to go to a customer and say, try this solution, it's great. I have no idea if it works or not because we've never done it before. No, we do everything internally first. And we'll talk about, again, we're going to go through some of the lessons we've learned through that process. And we've worked with SUSE, and a lot of those issues have all been resolved. So it's a great partnership. We cut ourselves first so that you don't have to type deal. But you learn a lot along the way. And it's interesting. But so, talking about Ceph, why do we choose Ceph? Well, as our very technical CTO will tell you, the other solutions sucked. It was just painful, and we've started this journey.
I think it was very technical, and that's his technical term.
Yes.
For his previous solutions.
He's technical and he's very blunt.
Very blunt, yes. He can have some very awkward conversations with people because he knows what he's talking about, and if you don't, he'll figure it out very quickly. But yeah, so this, keep in mind too, when we started down this path, it was probably 4 years ago we went down this path. So the storage landscape has changed quite a bit in the past 4 years. But even still, these proprietary solutions out there, they just really weren't changing. They were getting some higher performance, and you're getting SSDs and NVMEs and things like that. But the underlying way you use them and access them and scale them out really wasn't changing. And that just didn't work for us. the cost was also incredibly high because they had you locked in, they knew it, and doing a lift and shift or a complete, that stuff's really expensive. So if oh, well, controller X is no longer supported. For your scale, you need now controller Y. And I feel like we're starting over all the time. This is a really expensive way of dealing with storage. Isn't there some way I can just incrementally add more storage or add more capabilities, more performance, rather than having to keep starting over from scratch?
Right, and I'd just like to add, there's not much more frustrating situation than when you've already spent a lot, and it seems like SANs, this tends to be pretty common, where you've expended a lot of energy and invested a lot of money, and then you find out end of life, and then you've got to actually do a rip and replace. And usually your vendor will come in and they'll offer you discounts, but still the extension of using that product and doing a rip and replace is really painful.
And in both internally and customer facing, we're very comfortable using open source solutions. We use a lot of open source solutions. We are all about it. There's areas where we use proprietary, there's areas where we use open source, but we're certainly not afraid of open source. We embrace that entire model. We know the risks and the rewards, and so that was an easy fit. It was massively scalable. Now Novacoast itself, we're around 300 employees. We don't need a ton of storage. So our use case was a little bit interesting because generally you want it for when you've either got a lot of archival storage or you need a lot of scalable storage and you're growing rapidly. We didn't quite fit that mold, but that was okay with us because we wanted to really play with it and use it internally and before we used it with our customers. So we started at a much smaller scale than you normally would, but we've continued to grow and do fun things. So massively scalable isn't as important for us internally. Reliable absolutely is. Again, data is the keys to the kingdom. If you lose all your data, how quickly does your phone ring when that goes down?
How much storage did you guys need?
Oh, initially I can't even remember. I think we're in the 30, 40 terabyte range at this point, though, amongst two data centers. And like Dan said, we don't use file system storage for our day-to-day operations, really all for each user. We're not traditional in that sense. But of course, we have application workloads and application, Exchange, SAP, pretty much a lot of the stuff that you see floating around here, and that data builds up. So I'd say we're probably we use less storage than probably your average business. However, that makes it all the more great because, they'll tell you that you really want a certain amount of data before this makes a lot of sense, but for us it's made sense, and we're really under that scenario. So and it's
an
saved us a lot of money.
interesting use case because they really weren't pushing the limits on how much storage they needed, but they had SANs that were being discontinued, and the cost of continually maintaining something that you've had for several years was going up. And by leveraging this architecture, the costs are lower. If they ever want to add storage, it's no drama. So they have industry standard hardware they can pick from. They're not worried about going back to a locked-in vendor who says, this is the thing you have to buy. You can't buy it from anybody else. And here's how much it's going to cost. So it was open, and it was easily flexible and upgradable. Even if they didn't need it all today, who knows what happens in the next year or two or three. So it was future-proof. And there was no vendor lock-in, and that's part of the onus is on SUSE to make sure we deliver something that's really valuable, because it's easy for them to just pick up and go someplace else because there is no vendor lock-in. We're talking about industry standard hardware and industry standard drives. So there's a lot of places they could go. We're hoping that we'll deliver the best solution and keep them on SUSE Enterprise Storage.
And the flexibility and innovation have been fantastic for us too, because for example, new use cases come up all the time. Our security group decided they needed somewhere to store rainbow tables, so we set up Cephfs access for that. Things you wouldn't have thought of initially, but yeah, it keeps changing, and the solution can meet that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no vendor lock-in. We've said that a few times.
And the rapid development obviously is huge for us because we started, I think, at version 2 of SUSE Enterprise Storage.
Right.
And going through that upgrades, particularly in the early days, wasn't necessarily much fun. But the new features we've gotten, the upgrade to Blue Store, what did that do for us?
Yeah, well, performance and just the efficiency is the main thing, right? Because, as soon as you're pumping a lot of hardware at a situation, you want it to be as efficient as possible. And then, of course, the the upgraded monitoring tools like Salt and Dashboard and stuff were a huge advantage over OpenATtic, as far as I could say. OpenATtic was, when those tools were upgraded, they were improved just exponentially.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen that again and again. And I think one of the gentlemen in the general session today mentioned about how version 6 is coming out soon. But with a whole new set of features, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, did anyone use Calamari ever for managing SES? No,
Yeah,
good.
that was one of the
OpenATIC's a
originals.
significant
That's what that was going.
Neat, just maybe not something you want to manage a storage cluster with.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've always had a great relationship with SUSE. So, Brian's been with us for longer than I have, that's for sure. And and
we're going to keep him after you're gone.
Yeah,
Right.
all the SUSE. That's true. But all the SUSE people have been really great. And when we've run into issues, I mean, we've talked to them a lot and talked to through some of the challenges we had, and that was our learning experience. But everybody is willing to kind of go the extra mile. So I'm sure all of you have dealt with SUSE people at one time or another, and I hope your experiences have been as great as ours.
One thing I'd like to point out is not a lot of people are asking questions at this point, but we do have a ton of socks and shot glasses to give away. So just to encourage an interactive audience, please, this is conversational, ask questions, whatever you have. Anyone yet?
Well,
Not
Bob already spoke up, so we'll hook up Bob.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so what went right with this, right? So definitely the storage cost went way down compared to what we were, having to deal with before. So that was why a big reason why we went this route, and that's just not in the storage in general. It's not just for the application, but also for the hardware, right?
And that was raw storage, by the way.
So storage growth down. Yeah, no downtime or loss of data. Pace of innovation, fantastic, like we said. Excellent interaction with SUSE. And the end users don't know anything's changed. So you really do have that abstraction, right? Because your end users don't care about that stuff. They don't care what the canvas is. They want to know what the painting looks like. So that really worked out for us. So nobody would ever utter a bad word about our back end.
Yeah, one of the things we did when we first spec'd out our hardware too is we got a lot of our systems with empty drive bays. We didn't need that much storage, but we needed a certain minimum number of servers to build out Ceph. So why not get slightly larger hardware, leave some drive bays empty, and that's how we've grown our storage. So I think we've added some servers too. But
I was going to talk about that when I talked about how we set up our East Coast data center. So let's get through this first, and then we'll. Yes. So yeah.
This is probably my fault more than anything else, because our CTO said, let's do this. We've been looking at it and evaluating, and so we worked together. And in this day, 4 or 5 years ago, there really wasn't a good guide on what hardware you needed, how to spec things out, where to invest your resources. Do you need more processor? Do you need more memory? How important is disk speed versus interface versus all these other things? What about my network interconnects? All those things were really nebulous back then. And so we really tried to kind of do our best, and we messed up. We weren't perfect. The good thing for us is we don't need super high performance, but there's so many better, there's reference architectures, all these different great things you can get out of the box now. There's guides for this type of use case. That's what your MONs should look like. This is what your OSDs should look like. Here's what you need for gateways and all these different things. And those are things that SUSE has worked with us and we've collaborated on. And it's been great because a lot of the guesswork that goes into speccing out your hardware isn't there anymore. It's so much easier. And if you don't want to take any guesswork at all, you can go to a vendor and you can say, I want X amount of storage with this amount of performance and this use case. And they can say, perfect, here's your bundled t-shirt. There you go. And so we didn't have that option, and as a result, there was some pain there.
Was it just performance was slow, or what do you mean you didn't spec it out correctly? How did you know you didn't spec it out correctly? Because the I/O was too slow, or?
Well, so the first thing we did wrong was and actually this gets into the next data point, I think. So we had 2 data centers, and we originally were thinking about building it all at the same time. Unfortunately, our second data center, the availability didn't work out. And so we planned on having monitor nodes in both locations. didn't work out. So we'd only had hardware for 2 monitor nodes, which is not how you always need an odd number. That was wrong. And so we had to combine monitors with OSDs, which you're not supposed to do. That'll impact performance. In our case, we're not doing anything that high performance, so it wasn't that bad. It was just having to kind of juggle the services around more than we would have originally liked. I think we didn't spec out enough RAM for our gateway. Bless you. There's a couple other things like that. So we could have spent our money on a better, spec'd out the hardware differently and gotten better results. It all worked, but we just had excess resources in some areas and less efficiency in others.
And even in this case, even when you're not trying to spec for high performance, there are times of the day, times of the month or whatever, where you would have spikes or something like that, where now all of a sudden, you weren't really planning for performance, but now you kind of need it for just a 10-second period of time, but then everybody else gets affected during that 10-second period of time. So it's not like it's crazy, but it's somewhat annoying that all of a sudden every now and then you experience something and you're not quite sure why, and then and that's just not what you want to deal with in IT. You need things to be a little bit more smooth, a lot less drama in the day. So just little things, little things can be big as they go.
Yeah, for an example, I ran into this a few weeks ago. We run an SAP deployment, and we're not running, our main production server is all one box. And we had done some patching upgrades, and we hadn't really done it as much as we needed to. I'll leave it at that. But anybody that's run to a BTRFS balancing, it really just killed the CPU, because after all this patching and reboots, and we deleted a bunch of snapshots, it was ugly. It was ugly, but so in that case, it's like it was humming along great, and then this job kicked in, and nobody could get an SAP, and it was like, oh, why is that happening? I had to figure it out. It was a real pain. So just an example.
The goals were to replace legacy SANs with new, shiny, flexible, open everything. But we didn't really have, this is our benchmark for success. By date X, we want to have this. We want to have these workloads migrated. It was a little more nebulous than that. So it's hard to say whether something's successful or not if you don't define those goals beforehand. So yeah, it's not that we weren't successful and we didn't achieve our goals. We just didn't really, you need something a little more concrete if you want to be able to say, yes, everything's going great, or no, we're behind schedule, or those types of things. And we didn't. And that happens on a lot of projects.
Yeah.
So, what is actually your positions at Novacoast? Are you a storage administrators, or you do a little bit of everything?
I do a little bit of everything. So like my internal IT department, we're doing pretty much all the support infrastructure for our engineers. So we're doing email, we're doing VoIP, firewalls, storage. So that's another thing, because I think at least in most organizations that I've worked, that tends to be the way it is. So in all the positions I've ever had, that's been how it is. So that's why it's integral to have a good solution for storage, because I don't have even one person in my department that can spend all their time on it. It doesn't exist. We have to monitor, and we're a security-focused company, so security comes first, and we've got a lot of tasks to do there. So, and Dan.
Yeah, so I'm more on the customer-facing side. So I'm on the engineering consulting side, you can think of it. So I work with our customers to implement these types of solutions, and some of them do have dedicated storage teams, some of them don't. The interesting thing about this is because it's Linux-based, there's a lot more crossover. You don't have these dedicated storage admins who only know SANs. Now you've got like the Linux team who can and sometimes there's some friction there because the Linux team's like, oh, I can automate this, and we don't need a storage team anymore. And the storage team's saying, wait a minute, what about us?
That's one of the issues that I face when I speak to customers in terms of how to deal with the change and all that. So that's why I was asking if you have to deal with that change internally on your organization.
We didn't.
You are prepared for that because you just choose the best solution that fits for the needs that you have.
The other thing to note, and we'll talk about this in use cases too, is we're not traditionally trying to go in and replace a SAN when we're talking with a customer. It's if they've got a SAN and they're happy with a SAN, great. It's for these new use cases you have where you're generating tons of machine data, or where you've got this new requirement to retain logs for X number of years or whatever it is. So we're usually starting with customers on those new use cases. Sometimes we've done a couple of replacements too, where something's reached end of life and they want to get off of it. But for the most part, the faster wins for us have been when we've got, we're putting in this massive video surveillance system. We need to store it somewhere, that type of stuff. And then you're not stepping on anyone's toes as much politically either, because it's something new rather than something replaced.
Right, and especially when you've got all that data, I mean, you don't necessarily want to stick it in tier 1 store, your super expensive tier 1 storage, right? I mean, because it doesn't need to be there. I mean, video, like that's a perfect, that's a perfect solution for it. But as far as the software-defined storage, we've pretty much run almost everything in our organization on it. We have run everything in our organization on it because we just run it out of our hypervisor, and any servers we want to stick in there, we've run them all on the SUSE.
We had a question.
Oh, sorry.
You basically moved to Ceph from your SAN environment?
Yes, well, we, like a lot of our customers, we supplemented at first. So on our front-end production environment, we are, yes, I know most of you have probably gotten our socks, and you're going to get more. So
Come by the booth, we'll fill that up. We can fix that for you.
Yeah. So we were kind of exactly what we're talking about. We supplemented what we had. We still had SANs that were perfectly capable and we still had support on. So we brought in the software-defined storage and we, or the SUSE product, and we supplemented it and we ran it and we tested it. And then, the use case that we really were excited about was to set it up to be complete redundancy for all our applications on the production side as well.
So what happened to performance in moving from SAN to Ceph? Were you getting comfortable? Did you actually?
Oh no, yeah, there was really not an issue in moving as far as performance. I was worried because once I stuck in Exchange on it, I was concerned because Exchange is not super high performing, but it can be. And there's a lot of data. There's a ton of data. And the main thing is everybody uses it constantly. And if anything happens with it, almost immediately. So we built a pretty robust Exchange environment, probably more robust than we need. We set up our DAG with 3 systems on our West Coast data center. And then we built it out also on our East Coast data center. And so that we could do failover if we needed to, and we didn't see a performance hit. So that being said, I don't know, with the SAP stuff we run our production on one big hardware box, but I don't know that we just did that based on, it's before my time, but we did that based on recommendation from our consultant at the time. So it might have made sense at the time, but if we moved everything over, it probably would work just fine.
And we've got.
So just on your Exchange, did you move all your Exchange data in one move across, or did you do it gradually?
Well, we did 2 things at once. So we were actually moving to a completely different Exchange environment. So not only did we move Exchange to software-defined storage from SUSE, we were actually moving from one Exchange version to another and to an entirely different data center at the time. So this was a giant migration. So that sounds scary, and it was scary. But the thing about it, the advantage was when we had 3 of those, the 3 different moves we were making, we had a lot more, let's say that people were not as worried about, if we did have downtime, we had more excuses, let's say, but we really didn't. An Exchange migration is no fun, so anybody that's done one, and a lot of folks are doing them up to Office 365, and you use kind of similar tools, whether you're moving from on-prem to on-prem in a different data center, which we were doing in different versions, or if you're moving all your stuff up to Office 365. We're in a situation where we can't use Office 365. We had to make this move, and we had to keep it on-prem because of regulatory and security purposes. So, and that might change. But no, that, as far as the storage part, that was probably the easiest piece, rather than just the move to the data center, moving versions and everything else. Yeah, back there, sorry.
Sorry, just curious how you do
troubleshooting on performance monitoring? Is it all just you see an hourglass and you try to figure it out?
No, I mean, Open Attic allows you to do trending information, so you can kind of get a feel. You can get in there. It really depends on how much time you have. We have monitoring tools that monitor the environment in a myriad of different ways. But as far as from the storage perspective, we can see, using Open Attic, what's actually happening at any given time. So like anything else with monitoring, you really have to have people. You know, I'd love to have everything automated, although then the robots will replace us, so I'm always kind of like, how much of this is really working great? But that's the thing, you still have to dedicate some time to make sure that you can collect and analyze this stuff, right? So that's really how we're doing it. But we have the tools to do it. So it's a pretty robust set of tools, especially when you just stand it up. Yeah.
Okay, and I troubleshoot this environment on occasion, and the area I see difficulty on the server hardware layer is hard drives soft fail.
Okay.
So I have a hard drive, didn't go out, but I'm taking errors against it.
Oh, right.
Malperforming. You know, I'm taking read errors, so I've got a malperforming piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding customers today don't have tools to monitor and say, I've got a failure, or I've got a pending failure, or I've just got a slowdown on that one physical hard drive.
Right.
Throughout the.
So what we found, and Brian might be able to talk more about this, the tools that are inherent in the product as far as getting in and looking at it at the command line level, running the commands that are telling you whether or not your system, your OSDs are fine, and if there's any kind of issues that it's seeing, there definitely is always room for improvement with translating that to a dashboard situation, and then even better to have the ability to get notifications based on what the dashboard is seeing. And that's one of the things that V6, I imagine that they're going to improve on as well. But every tool I've ever used to do SAM management has had room for improvement. That's for sure. Yeah.
So you should have on the Open Attic dashboard independence graphics on some performance for the OSDs. And I know that it's kind of,
Yeah,
should be.
I was just thinking about that. We could get down to like a pool level where I could monitor IOPS over a time period, because in the interface you could say I want to see the past 12 hours, past month, or past 5 years. And if I could see a degradation over a 5-year time span, because if you just looked at 12 days, well, it could have been suffering for 18 days, in which case 12 will look normal because they're all the same. But if I were to go back 30 days, I might start to see it, or a year. So I could see that over a pool. I'm trying to think if I could see that on a disk level. And when you're talking about 500 or 600 disks, that might be a little bit cumbersome. So I'd want to come up with a different mechanism, something else that's tracking performance per OSD, not the actual OSD host, but the OSD drive itself. Something that would track performance and then alert me. I think there's an algorithm I'm sure we could come up with. I don't know how complicated it would be, but I don't know if I know that I don't think that it's in the Open Attic dashboard today.
I mean, the information is there.
The information
is there because Open Attic is gathering, and if you go to the OSD tab, you can click on a particular OSD and it will show you a specific information for that OSD.
Right.
So the information is there. The problem that I understand from this gentleman's point of view is that if you have a lot of OSDs, it might be complicated to spot the one that is
right. But if we could come up with some algorithm that would start to scan through each of them and look for any performance degradation, just alert you. It might not be a problem, but at least surface it, bubble it up to the top to take a look at it.
It's a really good feedback. You should talk to Lance Gilman to see if we can come up with something.
You had a question, right? Another one? Mm-hmm.
Your east and west data centers are backing up each other?
Yeah, so what we do, we're using application replication, meaning so instead of, now the product has the ability to replicate do replication based on the software-defined storage. It has its own replication scheme. We do not do that. So what we're doing, so for like Exchange, for instance, it's replicating via the DAG. So they're always replicating based on the cluster. So we just have basically an Exchange cluster that's bridging 2 data centers, and they're replicating all the time. And we check them from time to time. And the idea is we want to make sure that 2 things. We have we want to make sure if all our databases, for whatever reason, on the West Coast had a problem, we could bring it up on the East Coast and everybody could have email again. And we also want to make sure that if the entire data center went down, independently of our actual systems, if the data center went down, for God forbid some horrible disaster, we're able to have business continuity based on our solution on the East Coast.
So you're using iSCSI to
Yes,
storage?
iSCSI, and we.
Essentially, you're using clusters at each end so that basically anything happens at one and the other one just fails over?
Right, that's the idea. And like anything, you've got to test it, just like you've got to do restores on your backups and such, so that you're not kind of caught unawares when it actually happens. But so far, it's been working great for us.
Colin, we had a couple questions here. Right?
Oh yeah.
So what was the SAN hardware you were using before you migrated to Ceph?
Well, I tell you what I have to go. No, we've used a number of products. So we've used EqualLogic. We used
Datacenter.
Yeah, Zytotech. That was one of the older ones. I forget the name, but that brings up a point real quick because I know we're getting close on time. So I just wanted, because one of the main advantages to the system is not having to have somewhere hardware to actually build out your cluster. So in the case of building our redundant data center, we had a bunch of unused or servers that had been used in our West Coast data center, and when we wanted to build our new cluster and upgrade it to BlueStore and the new version of Ceph, we actually literally ripped them out of the racks in LA. They were similar servers, but they weren't exactly the same, and the specs were not exactly the same. I mean, I always want to be as close as possible, but the beauty of the solution is you don't have to be the same. So we ripped these servers out, we packed them up, and we shipped them over to our East Coast data center, and then we flew out there and we took them out of the boxes, racked them, and everything else, and then we were able to use that to set up our cluster. So really, the most expensive piece of that whole project were flying us out to the East Coast and shipping out the servers, which was kind of expensive. I had to expense that, and I didn't like it. But that was really the most expensive piece. But it was a heck of a lot cheaper than buying all new hardware, and especially buying a whole new SAN to stick out there. So it was well worth it. Mm-hmm.
So you said you migrated that, so you have 2 data centers, right, primary and secondary. So what is the replication you use? Do you use native replication or do you use into?
So we use application, whatever the application is, we replicate it based on its application scheme. So my example is Exchange because that's the easiest one to think of because it's got built-in database replication, right? So you can say, I have 3 servers, they have 3 different databases, the mailboxes can be on any of these databases. All we had to do was build out the domain out on the East Coast, and then in our East Coast data center, and then build maybe 1 or 2 Exchange servers, right? 2 at the most, and then, not to get technical, but then we had a witness server for the database cluster. And then that whole cluster just worked as if they were in the same data center. So it took a while to replicate that data, of course, based on any kind of latency we had between the 2 data centers. But once that data is over there, the changes being made on a daily basis are very small. So you've got that replication. Other applications, but it does. Ceph does have the ability to do replication for everything on your storage side. So you could replicate everything using the replication, but we have not done that. So
was it active data centers?
It's really active passive. In a way, well, okay. It is active for the most part, but as far as like the Exchange replication goes, it is active. But we tend to, via other methods, we don't want users connecting to our Exchange system over because of latency on the East Coast. So there are other ways to make sure they don't. It's AD stuff. But it is basically active-active. That being said, we hardly ever use it. We just make sure that the data is the same on both sides. I mean, I can just log in an Exchange server over there and I can say, okay, everything's replicating fine. All my databases are mounted in Exchange. I know that that data is replicating. The logs look the same. The data looks the same. So if I have to bring one up, I'm very confident that it's going to work correctly.
And was there another question?
See, actually, this is going to be a big project for you, right? You might have done some analysis based on the existing storage. Basically, having your block storage, file storage, object storage, and you might have created some business case, right?
Right.
So I just puzzled, by looking at the spec is not perfectly configured. You cannot set the goals. Why that went wrong?
So this isn't the way we would do it for a customer. That's the important thing to keep in mind. So the way we did it internally was a lot more haphazard than we would do it for a customer. Because we have a lot of expertise in-house to, we have a higher pain threshold than a customer would. And we're okay with that. Our CTO is okay with that. Sometimes we do stuff and it fails because we're always trying new things and working. And we have a much higher risk tolerance. But no, we would not go to a customer and say, yeah, let's just try this hardware and see what happens. Or use cases, who needs those? No. So totally different ways of doing things.
The expertise, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, but I would just like to be clear, though, that speccing out the hardware correctly is one thing. You can still use different specifications, but you want to make sure that they're all to a level that are going to work. I'm not going to stick a 386 in one thing, say that, oh yeah, I can stick a 10-year-old machine in there and it's going to be great for the cluster. They still have to be, pretty decent hardware. It's just that if you happen to have unused hardware that is very good, but just you're not using anymore, maybe the application that you used it, you don't need anymore, maybe you were hosting something, so you can use that. And
yeah, performance is important. You're going to want good hardware.
Within your data center, and then you've done some benchmarks. Post that benchmark, then only you onboarded a customer to that system.
So for us, for internal benchmarking, we looked at basically what the performance was on the backend system. So we're looking at a traditional performance, CPU, IOPS, that kind of thing. My greatest benchmark is how many people complain about it, and we didn't have any. So I'll just be honest about that.
It's the important one.
Yeah.
Is this your East Coast or West Coast data center?
Sadly, it's both.
That's his garage where he does all his,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan. I love when cabling is neat and tidy. I just don't like to be the one to do it.
One other question. Can you comment? So you started probably on SES 4.
No,
Yeah,
that's
two.
Let's do a case we're on 5.5. How easy or difficult was it to update as new versions came out?
The upgrade process, as far as what we had to do to make sure that there was no downtime, was very easy. We would run into issues with the upgrade process, but it never really caused us pain, and we were able to work through it.
The only big one was Blue Store.
Yeah, the Blue Store
was
big.
optional. We chose to.
Yeah, we had to do some drive replacement at the same time that we were doing the upgrade, but we were doing that anyway. And I wouldn't say that it wasn't painful, but it wasn't super painful, but yet I only want to do it once every 3 years, right? If I can help it, just like anything else.
Yes.
But it was a lot easier than taking a SAN that had all my data and then ripping that completely out after migrating over to a whole new thing. It wasn't that difficult, and the expense especially, it just wasn't cost prohibitive.
Yeah, Blue Store was one of those things where, for those who don't know what Blue Store is, it's a whole different way of storing. It's more of like a native file system for Ceph, and you get significantly better write performance by switching to it. So we didn't have to, but obviously we like performance just like everyone else does. So.
Yeah, and we could. But that being said, we don't anticipate that they're going to switch to a whole other file system again in the next version. So it was kind of one of those major upgrades. Yeah, right. It was kind of one of those major upgrades that is going to be a little bit difficult, but once you get through it, you have a whole nother, maybe 5-10 years where we don't have to do that again.
What is your current version?
5.5.
Yeah, 5.5. So we are up to date and until 6 comes out. So when 6 comes out, the beauty of it is, since we're using, we can upgrade our redundant systems because it's not in production, make sure everything goes well there. at the same time, bringing up the other stuff. Because we're not using the replication piece at that level, I don't believe we would need to upgrade at the same time, because they're two inherently different systems. And that's one of the advantages that we have in using the native replication in whatever application we have. So that makes sense. I don't know if we have anything else.
Is this 50 minutes or an hour? Does anyone know?
It was pretty close to I think she said an
So
hour.
we have 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you want to flip through, just
I'll just flip through real quick because I don't know. I want to make sure use cases change over time. Definitely the current one of the redundancy that I was talking about. Yeah, we did stumble into a few bugs. Everything starts from scratch. Like we said, we started version 2. So, SUSE had to catch up, and they had to catch up their folks on the various documentation was a thing, as Dan said. Documentation has just gotten better and better. Anybody that's
noting that as an early adopter, SUSE worked really closely with us to make sure it was successful. So we weren't just thrown to the wolves or anything. They knew we were early, and they worked with us to make it successful.
Right, and that was a huge advantage. It was a steep learning curve only. I would say what's interesting, this might not be of interest to everybody, but the way I look at it is the difference between having a SAN, just your own SAN that you buy from a vendor, their proprietary solution, whether it be EMC, EqualLogic, whatever, is that it's almost like buying a stereo system. For those that used to actually listen to stereos, I'm looking around this room, I think we've all had stereos, sorry. But it's a stereo component where you just buy everything at once, or if you go out and buy pieces and put it together, if you all remember to do that. So the interesting thing to me is, in building this system, you get to actually see the pieces and how they work together, whereas a SAN that you just purchased from a vendor is almost like a black box. So if you have an interest, now some people might be like, I just want it to work and I don't really care, and that's how I am most of the time.
And there's reference architectures you can buy for Ceph that do that. Or you can pick and choose exactly the pieces and spend the money where you want.
Yeah, and that's what we did, because we like to do things that way.
So you mentioned steep learning curve. Would that be different if you were going today with 5.5 versus SES 2?
Yeah, there was not a lot of documentation when we started. The product had some rough edges in places that we had to discover. So yeah, absolutely, it's a lot easier now, 4 or 5 years later. There's still some learning curve, particularly for a traditional SAN engineer who now has to know a little bit of Linux and some things like that. But it's really easy. The documentation walks you through everything you need to do. So.
And the 5.5 implementation, we've got the new deep C stuff that's built in, and that makes the discovery and the preparation and the deployment so much easier because you don't have to do all the work manually like you would have done in previous versions. So we get better and better. SUSE does get better.
It's kind of like a full loop. It's like going back to the beginning almost, a little bit.
Like with a customer I set up, I think it was like a 15 node, 700 terabyte SAN in a few hours. So it's not hard.
I'll tell you, it was an extremely steep learning curve for me because I come from a Windows background. So I was learning Linux at the same time that I was learning this. But I will say that if you already know Linux, it's not like going out and buying a proprietary SAN that you have to learn everything. Because if you already know Linux, then a lot of the commands, everything is structured the same way. So in that sense, for a lot of people, the learning curve is probably less than if you have to go out. I mean, typically in SAN, when you're buying a SAN, the vendor comes in, and then they send people out, depending on how expensive it is, to sit there and let you learn. And hopefully their UI is really good on their dashboard or the tools they use, but they're not always that way, right? So that was great. Additional scale out, that's a huge advantage. Like I said, you can stick drives in all day long. You just stick more drives in and you're good to go. And there's some crazy scale outs for this system. I mean, stuff that you wouldn't do with proprietary and traditional SANs at all. Integrates with everything because it's all Linux based and
So we'll just go to the next slide actually. That's some customer use cases. So we've talked a lot about this stuff.
Okay, we'll just go through this stuff.
Sorry.
Yeah, world domination.
Down to one.
Everybody's.
Yeah, so some very use cases that are very common here.
Yeah, so these are things that we're actually working with customers on. So some of these are ones we've implemented, some of the ones we're still doing POCs on. I think there's like 6 of them. But so there's, for example, I worked with a state agency that does all their digital archives, about 1 billion objects that they store, whether it's marriage certificates or whatever legal documents they have. We did that with HPE. It was a great setup. It was really fun. It was a perfect use case because they're just storing all these objects. And they don't need a ton of performance for it. They just need it to be very reliable and available and scale because there's only going to be more legal documents. Other ones we've used, for example, is a speech recognition vendor that stores all their audio recordings for machine learning purposes. So they need a huge Ceph share. Or we've worked with police departments who need to be able to store all that body camera footage, or all those different types of things. So iSCSI is an easy one. Everything uses iSCSI. There's a lot of different ways of using iSCSI. But there's a lot of really interesting ones too that you don't see with the traditional standards. Object storage was never really their focus before for most of these vendors. So when you start getting into that and you start looking what developers are building around object storage with S3, Swift, that type of stuff, you can do some really cool stuff.
What do you mean that reusing the existing hardware? Started using the
Yeah, so like customers who they just migrated their web farm to the cloud. And so they've got 20 fairly powerful systems, or maybe it was a database environment they migrated, whatever it was. I forget what hardware they had, but they had some very high-end hardware that suddenly became available. And all they needed to do was throw in more storage, and we could turn it into a Ceph cluster.
So you all are replicated right now, but you're looking at EC. Is that correct for the last slide?
For us internally?
Yeah.
We're staying separate because that way we can upgrade or break or do whatever we want with one and still have another. It keeps it a little bit easier for us. But it's something we might do in the future. There hasn't been a benefit because we can replicate the application layer so easily that we've been doing it at that level.
Yeah, other people,
Depends on the use case.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the use case. Yeah.
Have you had yet to add an additional host to increase storage?
Oh, yes.
And what is the impact on the array after you add the other host and it's trying to equalize?
So it just goes through a building process when you add that array. So you can see it actually happening. And it takes a while, but there's been no impact on the user experience. So that's been our experience.
And that goes back to speccing out the hardware recording. A lot of people like to get these giant servers with a ton of disks because they're used to the SAN model. And if you've got 4 of those and you lose one and it has to rebalance, it's catastrophic. Or if you add one, it takes forever, it's catastrophic. It's, with the Ceph environment, until you get to a certain scale, it's better to have smaller systems with fewer disks. Just for those rebuilding purposes, everything else. Once you're large enough, absolutely get those big systems, and they're beautiful, they're amazing.
And there's ways to tune that. In fact, we did a session earlier on sort of tuning, where we touched on several things that can affect that performance. And when you're looking at adding a whole new set of drives in the cluster, if I've got to rebalance across them, if those drives are in a different chassis, then depending on how my interconnect is, if I'm on 10 gig, 25 gig, 40 gig Ethernet, or 100, that's going to determine how fast I can get that done. The CPUs are going to pass the data through the servers as fast as they can, but I need to be able to have that interconnect fast. And so depending on what I have, if I'm doing this a lot, I might choose to upgrade to a faster back end to make that less painful because of the time it takes, which really isn't painful, it's just you have to wait. But if it's every 2 years you're adding a couple new drives and a new chassis, maybe the pain is not that much. And so I wait. But at least in this case, you have a choice. You can pick and choose what's important to your workload and then build around that, where you traditionally wouldn't have that option.
Yeah.
When you add that additional OSD, like, are you shutting the whole system down? Is it?
No, it's all live.
Yeah.
It's all live.
Okay.
Yep.
And the users aren't experiencing downtime. They don't know that you're doing this.
Automatic.
But as an administrator, and you're sort of watching, you're just everybody wants to see, I want to see get to 100% as fast as I can. Because then there's nothing to go wrong. If something goes wrong, it's in the middle, it's not when it's at 100. So we'd like to see it get there faster.
Right. It's like clock watching or
Yeah, it's just like
water boiling watching.
clock
Or
watching,
water.
drying,
Yeah.
water boiling.
But we end up doing a lot of that. I don't know. It's a human condition, I think.
Make
sometimes.
sure your crush map is set up correctly too for those types of situations, particularly if you're taking the server out
Lots of ways.
unintentionally.
Yeah.
What's your networking look like for the OSDs?
As far as
Backbone 25?
we go to the recommendations. So yeah, we have it's all 10 gig backbone in the data center, and then we've got our connection over to the other data center. But that doesn't really matter for OSDs because we're not doing that replication level. So it's pretty typical. We don't do anything crazy.
Yeah, and what's really cool is those prices are coming down all the time. The 10 to 25 gig jump is negligible now. If you were doing it brand new, If you were spec'ing out a brand new day, you would just go to 25. There is no reason to stay on 10 unless you already had it.
Right, and that's where we
Had
were.
servers and your NICs for 10 and there was no expense to stay on it. Great, but if you're doing it brand new, you would at least go to 25 right off the bat because it's so cheap. And the beauty is you can buy cheaper drives, cheaper hardware, cheaper network infrastructure as time goes by and affect your workload. So you can always make it better.
Yep.
So
Well, I think
we're
they're probably
at
going to, yeah, we're
time.
definitely out of time, and they're probably
So-
going to start moving in. So we want to make sure we're not, but
Yep, appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
yeah, thank you, everybody.